Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take the materials you share, the things you're curious about, and, well, we dive deep. We try to pull out the key insights for you. Think of it as your shortcut to getting up to speed.
Exactly. And today we're digging into some really fascinating audio clips. They take us to a place just packed with history, defined by its landscape. The Judean lowlands, the Shpele Yehuda, and the mountains right next door, Har Yehuda.
Yeah, the sources sound like discussions from hikes, maybe some historical analysis thrown in, a couple of different voices exploring the area. So our mission today is to kind of piece together the story of this region based on what they shared. Ready to unpack this?
Let's do it. The first thing that really strikes you from the audio is the geography. It sets the stage for everything else.
Right. One clip starts you off right there, in the Shpele Yehuda, the lowlands.
And then it immediately points you east, up towards Har Yehuda, the mountains. You hear names like Hebron, Chevron, Bethlehem, Beit Lechem.
And even the edge of Jerusalem, Bishalayim, they mention it's higher up, right? Like 700, 800 meters?
Yeah, quite a bit higher. And then if you look west from the Shkela, you hit the coastal plain, Ashdod, Ashkelon down there.
So you get this real sense of moving from the coast through the lowlands and then climbing up into this mountain ridge.
And one of the speakers specifically says this transition zone, this area in between the mountains and the Shwela, the lowlands, it plays a major role in history.
Okay, so that's the key. It's not just mountains here and plains there. It's that space in between. Why was it so important?
Well, think about movement. The audio mentions heading from the lowlands towards the desert, maybe passing Bethlehem, seeing even more mountains beyond. There's this ridge of Har Yehuda on the east, sloping down west to the Shpela.
So it's a natural corridor.
Exactly. It connects different zones.
Yeah.
And you hear Beersheba and Arad mentioned further south, heading towards the Negev desert. It links the mountain heartland, the fertile lowlands, the coast, and the desert routes. A pathway for, well, everything, trade, armies, people.
Which leads us to Tel Socho. One clip mentions being right there. It's one of those tells, right? An ancient mound.
That's it. And this one is incredible. They talk about ruins spanning 3,000 years.
3,000 years. Wow.
Yeah, layers from Tanakh, times the biblical period, then Byzantine, early Muslim periods, all the way up to the 19th century.
So people kept coming back to this specific spot for millennia. It must have been consistently important.
It suggests exactly that. Strategic location, maybe good resources. And it wasn't empty later on either. They mentioned Arab villages like Beit Atika being the largest nearby until 1948. It shows this continuous thread of settlement.
Okay, so Tel Socho is like a window into this long history. And that brings us back to the Shpela's overall strategic value. Why was this zone between the mountains and the coast so fought over?
The sources are pretty clear on this. Its location in between the mountains and the Shwela, the lowlands, ready the coastal plains. That's the key phrase.
Meaning?
Meaning if you control the Shpela, you had a direct route down to the coast to big ports like Ashdod.
Oh, okay. So vital for trade, for projecting power.
Absolutely. For moving armies inland from the sea, or for the mountain dwellers to access the coastal trade. Control the Shpela, you control that connection. It shaped military thinking for centuries.
And we hear about specific fortifications, too, Hasmonean fortresses.
Yeah, from the time of the Maccabees and their successors, maybe 2nd, 1st centuries BCE, the audio suggests they weren't as common in the Shpele Yehuda as elsewhere, maybe built as the Hasmonean kingdom expanded outwards from the mountains.
Interesting. And there's a mention of one particular fortress that seems to have just one historical level.
Right. Which is quite telling, isn't it? It suggests it might not have been used much or rebuilt by later groups like the Romans or Byzantines.
So maybe it served a very specific short-term purpose for the Hasmoneans, like securing that newly expanded territory.
Could be. It raises questions about how solid or long-lasting their control was in this part of the lowlands at that specific time. It's a neat little archaeological clue.
Now let's shift to maybe the most famous story connected to this area, King David. Several clips bring him up.
Yes, and they connect him directly to this geography. There's a mention of Rakawi's commentary, the medieval commentator, explaining David coming down from the Hebron Mountains into the Shpele Yehuda.
So again, that movement between the high ground and the lowlands is central to the narrative.
It really is.
Huh?
And you hear mentions of Adullam and the place David fought Amalek, all seemingly converging in this same general area. It ties these early biblical threads together geographically.
And then there's the cave of Adullam, Marat Adullam, David's first hideout when he was fleeing King Saul, right?
That's the one. And it's fascinating how the clips link this to the modern Park Adullam. They even mention the name and the work of the Palestine Exploration Fund, the PEF, back in the 19th
Oh
century.
yeah, the PEF mapping expeditions.
Exactly. They were mapping the land, recording local Arab place names and traditions, and trying to match them to biblical accounts. That's a huge part of how many of these sites were identified.
So local memory playing a role in uncovering ancient history.
Definitely. And it's not just the cave. The sources mention lots of ruins within Park Adullam, mostly from Jewish villages of the Beit Shani period, the Second Temple era.
So a long history of settlement there before and after David's time. It wasn't some empty wilderness he was hiding in.
No, it was a populated landscape, even then, which makes sense given its location.
And that brings us inevitably to David and Goliath, the ultimate underdog story set right here.
Right in Mekhaila, the Valley of Elah. The audio paints a picture. It's described as the widest valley around there. You've got the Philistines
Down in the lowlands on Goliath's side.
and Saul's forces, the Israelites, coming down from the mountains, facing them.
And the sources give a reason for the conflict being here.
Yes, it goes back to resources. The lowlands, the Spela, were crucial for growing wheat. The Judeans up in the mountains, they mostly had grapes, olives.
Ah, so controlling the Spela meant controlling the grain supply, a major economic driver for conflict.
Precisely. So this wide valley becomes the natural stage for a showdown over access to those vital resources.
And David comes down from Bethlehem up in the mountains again to find his brothers.
Sees Goliath doing his thing, takes him on. And the story even includes that detail about the stone for his sling maybe coming from the riverbed in the valley itself.
Grounds the whole epic battle in the actual terrain. And then the Philistines flee back towards Gath and Ashkelon, their cities on the coastal plain.
It all fits the geography, the strategic lines of movement and retreat. It makes the story much more, well, tangible when you understand the landscape.
Okay, so moving forward in time, past the biblical era, the audio also touches on later layers, these things called cover shakes.
Yeah, Kibbur Sheikh means roughly the tomb of a sheikh or holy man. You see these domed structures, often on hilltops. They became common in the later Muslim periods, Mamluk, Ottoman times.
And what's interesting about them?
Well, the sources mention this pattern of cultural interaction. Apparently, there was often respect shown by Muslims for existing Jewish holy sites. Sometimes they'd even adopt them, build their own shrines there, integrating the traditions.
So a layering of sanctity.
Sort of. They give examples like Kiver Shimon, maybe Simeon the Just from the Second Temple period, or Nabi Samet, which some connect to Samson Shimshon. It raises questions about who venerated the spot first.
It shows how history isn't neat compartments, but this continuous process of use, reuse, and reinterpretation of the landscape.
Exactly that. Each era leaves its mark, sometimes literally on top of the previous one.
And speaking of marks on the landscape, let's talk about the trees. The audio brings up the pine trees, Etze Oren. They're everywhere, but they're not native.
That's right. Most of those pine forests were planted, largely by the JNF Kirin Kayamet Lazriel.
Why pines?
Well, the thinking at the time was they were cheap, they grew fast, and the goal was reforestation, making the hills green again after centuries of, well, deforestation and neglect.
But now the thinking is changing, isn't it?
It is. Ecologically, we now understand pines can be problematic. Their needles acidify the soil, preventing native undergrowth.
Less biodiversity.
Right. And they're very flammable, which is a big fire risk in this climate. So now there's a push in some places to thin them out or even remove them and encourage the native trees, oak, lawn, to return.
Weren't the oaks cleared historically? I think the audio mentioned Ottomans using them for railways.
Yeah, that was a major factor in the original deforestation. So there's a kind of trying to reverse some of that history, ecologically speaking.
And there's another layer too, right? The planting sometimes happen in areas where Arab villages used to be after 1948.
That connection is often made, yes. The timing and location of some JNF planting projects coincided with the displacement and depopulation of Palestinian villages. It adds another really complex social and political dimension to the story of these forests.
So wrapping this up, it's clear this region, the Spela and Har Yehuda, isn't just scenery. It's a landscape that has actively shaped millennia of human history.
Absolutely. It's this crucial crossroads, strategically vital, agriculturally important. It's a setting for foundational stories like David's.
Both his rise against Goliath and his time as a fugitive.
Right. And then you have the later layers, Hasmonean forts, Muslim holy sites, built sometimes over older ones, and even the modern ecological story of the pine trees and the efforts to restore native forests. It's all interconnected.
So for you, the listener, thinking about all this history packed into such a relatively small space, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It really does. What other stories are still hidden in those hills and valleys? And maybe the bigger question is, how does understanding this incredibly deep, layered past, the conflicts, the coexistence, the way people shape the land and the land shaped them, how does that inform how we see this place now and think about its future?
A powerful thought to leave with. We definitely encourage you to explore the sources further if this sparked your interest, maybe dig deeper into the archaeology and history of the Judean lowlands. Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep exploring.